Hey there, welcome to another video. Today we'll look at how to compare and contrast poems for iGCSE or GCSE English Literature. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so first of all, let me clarify. This is a guide on how you can compare and contrast two poems for the English Literature final exam, i.e. the iGCSE or GCSE exam. Now, for GCSE, I'm not sure if you have a compare and contrast question between poems, but for iGCSE English Literature, specifically Pearson Edexcel iGCSE English Literature, the second question in the first paper is focused on comparing two poems. So this video is going to teach you exactly how to do that. Now, this video doesn't just teach you how to compare and contrast between poems. It's quite useful if you want to know how to compare and contrast between two texts. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into what is actually assessed in this sort of question. Now, there are some things called assessment objectives, which is how the examiner assesses your paper, and two of these are assessed for this compare and contrast question between the poems: assessment objective 2 and assessment objective 3. These two, AO2 and AO3, they are the focus for the compare and contrast question, and you can read them over here. So the first one, AO2, it says you need to analyze the language, form, and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know I've done one on unseen poems, which is totally focused on assessment objective 2, which is analyzing language, form, and structure to create meanings and effects. That's completely all you have to do for the unseen poem question. But now, for this second question, which is the compare and contrast of the poems, you have AO3 as well, which explores links and connections between texts. So there are two important things you have to focus on here for this poem comparison question, which is language, form, and structure plus links and connections. Now, you might be wondering, how do I find these links and connections? And what even are language, form, and structure? What does it mean? Well, don't worry, I have it all sorted out. First of all, for language, form, and structure, you need to watch my other video on unseen poems. I think I mentioned it before as well. It's linked down below. When you click on the link, it'll take you to the exact place in the video where I talk about language, form, and structure. Otherwise, you can buy my online digital guide to language, form, and structure, which is just $2 right now. It's on a discount, so you can go ahead and purchase that. The link to that is below as well. It's a more comprehensive guide, a much better guide to language, form, and structure than the video I have. So if you want, please check that out. So that's language, form, and structure sorted out. You should please understand what these three things are before progressing in this video. And as always, links are down below. So moving on, let's come to links and connections. Making links and connections between two poems is specifically hard because all poems are different and there's never any obvious standout reason for why they're different. Of course, some poems you can clearly see the differences and you know the similarities, but other poems you really have to delve deeper into the hidden meanings, the metaphors, and other things to find links and connections. And you need to work really hard by practicing so that you get this thing right. You get the habit of finding these links and connections properly. Of course, it can't just happen or come to you automatically after watching this video. Lots of practice is needed so that you become like really great at finding links and connections between poems. But what I'm going to try in this video is explain to you the steps you can take to make the process easier for you during an exam. Now, the advantage here is that you don't have to compare and contrast between unseen poems. The poems that you have to compare between are all from your anthology. So, for example, If, poem at 39, Piano, Hide and Seek, 2:30, Blessing, all of those anthology poems are the ones which you will be asked to compare. So now let's go ahead and look at the steps that you have to take. These steps are very important. Be sure to use these when you're practicing your past papers. First of all, and most obviously, you have to read both poems thoroughly. In the exam, you are given the booklet of poems, so you don't have to worry about memorizing them. You have to just read through them thoroughly. Even though I know you have probably read them 100 times before, still read through them again. Sometimes you see things that you've not seen before in the poems. Now, Once you've read them thoroughly, you have to read the question properly and focus on the question's keyword and decide on a central argument. Okay, so let's break this down. The first thing you have to do is focus on the question's keyword. Each question always has this particular keyword in it. So for example, if the question says compare La Belle Dame Sends Mercy to another poem like Poem at 39 based on relationships. So the keyword here is relationships. Why? Because the question wants you to compare both poems on the basis of the theme relationships, not on anything else, not on some other theme like equality or anything else. It wants you to focus on the theme of relationships. So you have to focus on that keyword and always keep it in your mind when you're answering the question so that you don't stray away from the main part of the question, okay? Then you have to decide on a central argument. What does this mean? You have to decide what is the main thing that you're going to show is the difference between the two poems. How are you going to show that these poems are different and have some small similarities as well? What's the main thing you're going to differ on? And we're going to look at an example question later on in the video as well to help you with this so you'll understand better. Now, third step. Identify and underline key points for comparison, similarities, and differences. So when you are reading the poems and when you understand the keyword and you understand your central argument, what is the argument you're going to make that's going to differentiate these two poems for you, you have to start identifying and underlying key points. With your pencil, you can just underline and identify, circle quickly, really roughly. You have to do this so that you know what you are dealing with, you know what you're going to talk about. And another way you can do this is by creating a plan. Students who create plans are generally said to achieve higher grades than those who don't make a plan before answering, because when you make a plan, your mind is cleared out. You know exactly what you have to talk about, what you have to say, what you don't have to say, and how you're going to say it, okay? So that's your third step. Now, fourth step is, of course, the main part, which is structuring and writing your answer with clear paragraphs, including these 4 small subparts, which are, number 1, textual evidence, which means quotes. You need to include proper, relatable, relevant quotes in your answer, which actually, are related to your points. I think I said related a lot there, but what I mean is don't just include any quote from the poem if it's not related to what you're trying to say, if it's not related to the question's keyword or your central argument. Don't just bombard quotes into your answer. That doesn't get you marks. They have to be relevant. Number 2, context and the author's intent. You have to look at why the author is writing in a certain way. What's their purpose? What is the context? What was the situation in which the author was writing this? So for this, obviously, you need background knowledge on the author and the poems. And if you have this sort of knowledge and include it in your answer, it's very impressive. Examiners get impressed and you get good marks. Of course, the context that you include, like for example, if a poem was written during the Great Depression or if it was written because the author lost their father at a young age, it has to be correct. The context has to be correct and it has to be related to what you're talking about. Don't just bring in random context, random background information, which is not related to the question, okay? Third, analysis of language, form, and structure, the most important, and you need to know what language, form, and structure are to be able to analyze them. Then fourth, the evaluation of the impact on the reader. Sorry for the spelling of evaluation, that's a typo. Okay. So what does evaluation of the impact on the reader mean? It means as a reader, when you read the poem, what impact does all of this make on you? The context, the author's intent, the language, form, structure, the content of the poem, what impact does it have on readers? And what is the difference between the impacts on the readers for both poems? Like how does one poem impact the reader? How does the other poem impact the reader? All right. So throughout the answer, we have to keep comparing, keeping our central argument in mind. Then, of course, the last thing you do is conclude your answer by reiterating or repeating the main argument that you had, whatever it is. Now we're going to go through these steps again while looking at an exemplar student answer which got 30 out of 30. But before we do that, let's look at the question itself. This is an example question from the exemplar answer PDF, which is also linked down below, by the way. Now, the first thing you have to notice here is how it directly says compare. So okay, we have to compare here, nothing else. You don't have to analyze the poem, you have to compare two poems. What do we have to compare? Okay, let's read. Compare how the writers present relationships in La Belle Dame Sans Merci and one other poem from the anthologies. Okay, so we got our keyword here, just like I said before. The keyword for this question is relationships. That's what we have to focus on. Now, they've given us a choice between La Belle Dame Sans Merci and one other poem. So now it's up to you. You can choose any other poem that you think you can compare properly with La Belle Dame Sans Merci, and also it has to be focused on relationships. Okay, now we come to the second line. You should make reference to language, form, and structure. You should. That's how important it is. Lastly, support your answer with examples from the poems. What does examples from the poems mean? Same thing I said before. Quotes, textual evidence. All right. Okay, so now that we've looked at the question, let's move on and look at what the examiner expects. What do they think is a perfect answer? Now, there are many levels according to which the examiners check your paper. There are up to 5 levels. Level 1 being the lowest, level 5 being the highest you can possibly achieve. Okay, and all of this criteria is always in the mark scheme. So if you're practicing a past paper, you can look at the mark scheme and find out which level you probably came at according to your answer if you're self-checking. Alright, so the highest achievable level is level 5 in this case. You get either 25 to 30 marks between that range, and the highest marks is obviously 30 for this question, for this compare and contrast question for the poems. And this is basically the criteria for getting a level 5 answer. Okay, let's read this out. The response is a cohesive evaluation of the interrelationship of the language, form, and structure used by the writer and their effect on the reader. Okay, so a level 5 answer is a cohesive evaluation, a complete or in-depth analysis of the interrelationship of the language, form, and structure used by the writer and their effect on the reader. So you have to combine all the effects of language, form, and structure that are used by the writer, and you have to compare both poems, language, form, and structure, and their effects properly, cohesively, using critical thinking. Okay, so that's one criteria. Second criteria, the response compares and contrasts the poems perceptively with a varied and comprehensive range of similarities and or differences between the poems. So this is actually, I feel, the most important criteria for getting a high grade on this answer. You have to compare and contrast the poems perceptively, not just effectively, perceptively. Meaning you have to be careful, you have to be clever about what you are comparing in the poems. Don't just compare everything that he starts the poem with I and the other author starts the poem with he. No, you have to find things that actually mean something, that are meaningful, that have an impact on the reader, and you have to compare those similarities and differences between the poems. That's why it says with a varied and comprehensive range. So not just lots of comparisons. Varied means different types of comparisons, okay? Different types of similarities and differences which actually have a meaning, okay? Now last, discriminating use of relevant examples to support the response, which means you have to use quotes, but it says discriminating use. Discriminating use means you don't just use every single quotation in your answer. You discriminate between the quotes and pick out those which matter the most in your answer or are related the most to the keyword here being relationships. And by the way, to know the criteria for the lower levels, you need to see the PDF linked below. So if you want to know what is a level 4 answer like, what does it include, what's the criteria for a level 4 answer, then you need to check the entire PDF, which is linked below. For now, this is the highest achievable level that you can get for a high graded answer. Level 5 is the highest level. Okay, moving on, let's look at the student response. So this is the Exemplar student response. The PDF I have open here is the same one, which is linked down below, by the way. I keep mentioning it again and again so that you eventually go and click on that link and download this, because it's a very useful resource for practice. Okay, there are also, by the way, sorry, going on a tangent again, but there are also weak student answers in this PDF. So if you want to see what not to write and how not to write your answer, you can read those weak student responses, which got like around 20 out of 30. By the way, 20 out of 30 is not that weak. 20 out of 30 is good as well. It's quite good, but of course we are achieving for the best here. So this is a 30 out of 30 answer, and right away you can see that this student has a plan here, which already tells you they've thought it out. They carefully planned what they're going to say in each paragraph. As you can see, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they know exactly what they're going to write. They're not going to get derailed or sidetracked. I mean, they're not going to ramble on about some unrelated topic. They'll stay focused because of their plan. Now let's look at the introduction. Now the introduction has to be something that impresses the examiner. You don't have to start by saying, in this answer, I'm going to compare this poem with that poem based on the theme of relationship. No, don't start like that. Start directly answering the question. What was the question? Compare on the basis of relationship La Belle Dame Sans Mercy with any other poem. So just answer directly by comparing some aspect of both poems. All right, and this is what this student does as well. Let me just zoom in here. La Belle Dame Sans Mercy is a folk ballad that tells a tale of medieval romance and courtly love. It is a very ominous, dark poem that portrays relationships in a completely different light to Poem at 39. Okay, so this student has chosen Poem at 39 to compare with La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. You can of course choose any other poem if you were writing the answer, but this student has gone for Poem at 39. Now let's see, the way they have introduced is quite effective. First of all, he has shown their knowledge about the first poem, which is La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, by mentioning it's a folk ballad, which is correct, and mentioning what it is about. Then it mentions the tone or the mood of the poem. It's a very ominous, dark poem. True again. That portrays relationships in a completely different light to Poem at 39. There you go. We've got our perfect opening answer. The question has been answered directly in this first line. Then she expands. How is it different? How is it in a different light to Poem at 39? Because, now she or he, I'm sorry, I keep saying she, they continue. Poem at 39 is a personal, almost confessional poem written in free verse that reflects Alice Walker's personal view on her relationship with her father. So already she has compared some aspect of both poems already. So this already impresses the examiner that, okay, she's not waffling about or talking about other things or saying that one poem has 6 stanzas or the other has 4. By the way, it's not correct, 6 and 4. I'm just saying a random number. So instead of doing those kind of things, this student has gone directly into the comparison area by telling us this is La Belle Dame Sans Mercy is an ominous, dark poem, while Poem at 39 is a personal and confessional poem which is written in free verse. So it's not a ballad, it's a free verse. Another point of comparison. And here the comparison between this poem being a ballad and Poem at 39 being free verse is a comparison on the form of the poem. And if you watch my video or see my guide, which is once again linked down below, only $2, you will know what is form and that it includes these kinds of things. So this is a direct comparison that's already been made in the introduction. So good introduction so far. It contrasts greatly to La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. So again, she's continuing with her point about how both poems are different. It contrasts greatly to La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. One, that Poem at 39 is a comforting outlook on a genuine relationship, while the other has a much more grim outlook on transient and perhaps even deceptive relationships. So once again, you can see something that the student here is doing, which is focusing completely on the keywords. So remember our first step, read the poem thoroughly. That's done. I think I forgot to include, but next step should have been make a plan. All right, you don't need to always write the plan like this with your pen. By the way, you can always make it with a pencil on the side. It's up to you, but the plan should be there. Then after that, what was the point? We have to focus on the question's keyword. Here it's relationships, and you can see how many times she mentions it. Relationship, 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 and relationships. So almost 5 times. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 times. So that's a lot for one paragraph, but it's perfect because that is what the question is all about. It is about relationships, so you need to keep it to that. Don't get side railed. All right. And then what was the other point? You have to decide on a central argument. What is the argument she's making here? She's making the argument that both poems reflect the theme of relationships in a different way. She's not going for too much similarities. She might mention similarities later, but she is only focusing right now on how they're very different in terms of how they portray relationships. One is very dark, ominous, and has an outlook on transient and deceptive relationships, which is La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. And then poem at 39 is completely different. It's personal, confessional. It focuses on a genuine relationship. So she is focusing, her argument is basically that both poems show the theme of relationship in a very different way. And now she's going to highlight that, and now she's going to talk in the rest of her poem about this argument. So she's going to focus on this and focus on the keyword, and she's going to use language, form and structure, she's going to use quotes, she's going to talk about context, etc. And I'm going to point it all out as well. Okay, let's continue reading. La Belle Dame Sans Mercy really seems to convey how relationships, especially those involving mad love, can be destructive and quite perilous. Just from the title, which translates as The Beautiful Woman Without Mercy, this ominously suggests that in relationships involving men and women, women are temptresses who can lead men to despair and betrayal. Okay, so now what this student is doing is talking about La Belle Dame Sans Mercy only. Right now they're shifting their focus. The introduction is over, so they're shifting their focus to La Belle Dame Sans Mercy and how it portrays the relationship and what it is implying in the poem about relationships, which is that they're destructive and quite perilous, especially when you focus on the title. Okay, so this is a very good reference to the title. If you mention the title, you get bonus points because it means you're paying attention. Okay, so The Beautiful Woman Without Mercy. And now she's not just he has not just suggested that the title helps us know that the relationship is dangerous, relationships are dangerous and perilous, but she or he goes on to explain further that this suggests ominously that in relationships involving men and women are temptresses who can lead men to despair and betrayal. And what effect does this have? She goes on to describe the effect. Immediately, Keats sets up his poem as one where in the relationship the man and the woman have predefined roles. So this is very high level thinking over here. The student has really thought out their point carefully, has mentioned the evidence, which is the title, and then explained the effect properly. So in La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, the student is suggesting that what Keats is trying to do here. Keats is the author, John Keats. He's trying to show that the man and the woman have predefined roles in the relationship. Okay, that's the type of relationship that La Belle Dame Sans Mercy shows. Now, another point to see here, not just how she has used a point, evidence, explanation, the PEE format. PEE format is very important to follow, by the way, and the student has used that. Not only that, but the student has mentioned some sort of, not context, but has mentioned the author's intent here, or the author's purpose, because what she's saying here is that Keats has set up this poem on purpose like this, has used the title like this on purpose. So it shows that the student is thinking about the author as well. Throughout the poem, Keats refers to the danger of obsessive love in relationships. The knight at arms was left alone and palely loitering with a lily on his brow. You can see quotes here, textual evidence. Okay, so now she or he is going on to explain the author's purpose, what the author is trying to show us about relationships in La Belle Dame Sans Mercy. His relationships destroyed him, the knight, leaving him companionless and quite purposeless, as suggested by the verb loitering. Good reference to the poem. The lily, once again, a flower of death, seems to foreshadow his impending death and reflects how this relationship almost drained the life out of him. So very good reading into the hidden meanings over here. The hidden meaning of a lily that suggests death. Okay, so this is very good knowledge of the poem, which you need to have beforehand. Not only did the relationship described by Keats drain the life out of him, out of the knight, it also drained the life out of the pale kings and princes too. Pale, the handwriting is a bit hard to read. And death, pale were they all. The fact, okay, so this is a quotation from the poem, and it's suggesting that the relationship is so dangerous and perilous and destructive that not only was the knight drained or almost about to die, but also the kings and princes. The fact that one woman has managed to reduce all these valiant men to shadows of their former selves reflects how Keats wants to portray relationships and love as things to be taken with caution. So this is really beautiful writing. Why? Because she or he is presenting their point properly. That the point over here is that this type of relationship which is being showed in the poem is shown as destructive and draining and something to be taken with caution. But the student is not just stating it, they're giving examples of the pale kings, how they were also drained, about the lily, about how the knight was loitering so he seemed purposeless, and mentioning the author and what the author is trying to do by mentioning all this about kings and stuff. What is the author trying to do? Keats wants to portray relationships and love as things to be taken with caution. So beautiful use of all these elements together. Perhaps this poem is a reflection on Keats' own experiences with love. His mad and unbounding love for Fanny Brown would have left him hopeless if it was taken away. Keats shows the danger of obsessive relationships well throughout the poem. Okay, so now what she or he has done in this poem is talk about the context. This over here is all context, background information that you would otherwise not know if you had just learned about the poem. But if you had delved deeper into the author's life and why he wrote the poem, or what might have been the reason for him writing such types of ballads, then you would know this and be able to insert it. So when the student inserts something like this, it shows they have a deeper knowledge of more than just the poem. They have some background knowledge as well, and they're using it to show their point, not just saying that he might have written it for Fanny Brown. No, it might be a reflection on how he might have felt if the same thing happened to him and this love was taken away. And once again, the student has reiterated or repeated the point they're trying to make, which is that Keats, the author, shows the dangers of obsessive relationships well throughout his poem because of all this evidence that is shown here. Okay, so now this whole big paragraph was all about La Belle Dame sans Mercy. Now the student has come to the other poem at 39. And now what the student is going to do is that he or she is going to compare between all this that was mentioned here and all that is in poem at 39, and you will now see why the student has gotten the marks that they have gotten. Sorry for scrolling down. Alice Walker, on the other hand, in poem at 39, conveys how relationships shape you rather than destroying. See, comparison already here. Shape you rather than destroying. So this is the comparison to La Belle Dame sans Mercy. Her poem's tone towards the end has a joyous tone to it, as she has this moment of epiphany where she realizes that her relationship with her father was not destructive as conveyed in Keats' poem. Okay, so another comparison again. How is the comparison made? Her poem's tone has a joyous tone, while Keats' poem had a destructive tone. Okay, so what is the student trying to say here? In Alice Walker's poem at 39, the relationship is viewed as something joyous, and towards the end, the author or the narrator of the poem realizes that her father actually had a constructive relationship, not a destructive. So once again, immediately the student has shown a comparison between both poems without waffling around. Walker writes, now I look and cook just like him, my brain light. This realization that this amazing person Walker has grown into has been shaped by her relationship with her father is quite poignant, or quite, significant. Whilst in La Belle Dame sans Mercy, the knight was left as a shadow of his former self due to his relationship, Walker was left wholesome and fulfilled from her relationship with her father, tossing this and that into the pot, seasoning none of my life the same way twice, happy to feed whoever strays my way. So another very good comparison. In La Belle Dame sans Mercy, the knight is left destroyed, destructed, feeling worthless, feeling purposeless, while in this case, in poem at 39, Walker is the author, is left wholesome and fulfilled from her relationship with her father. And then we have a quote here to show that what the student is saying is true. This metaphor, this quote is a metaphor relating to cooking, reflects Alice's generous, carefree spirit, especially conveyed with dynamic buoyant words, which was shaped by her relationship with her father. Okay. Now, the student has added something in brackets here, probably remembered later, but still they have added it, which shows you if you remember something that you're like, oh no, I needed to include that point, you can go back, try to include it like this. Of course, it's harder for the examiner to read, like it was for me a little bit, but the point is there. So what is the student saying here? That the generous, carefree spirit that the author has developed, which we get to know because of the dynamic, buoyant verbs used like tossing and seasoning over here, that was all shaped by her relationship with her father. So another positive, which is very different from La Belle Dame sans Merci. Alice's kindness was molded by her relationship with her father, presenting relationships as something fundamental to us as humans. On the other hand, see, comparison, very good use of this connecting word. On the other hand, in La Belle Dame sans Merci, relationships are presented as soul-destroying and grim, which completely contrasts to Walker's optimistic lookout. See, once again, the mention of relationships again and again here. 1, 2, 3, 4, probably a fifth one. Yes, fifth, sixth. How many times it's mentioned? Why? Because that is the question's keyword. I know I'm saying it again, but I need to drill it into everyone's minds. And not just mentioning relationships, just, irrelevantly, but actually comparing both poems and how both show them differently. La Belle Dame sans Merci, whilst it does refer to love, like poem at 39, portrays relationships as transient. Transient meaning fleeting, that doesn't last. Poem at 39 portrays relationships as lasting, which is quite a different stance. The middle quatrains of La Belle Dame are written with a euphoric tone. Euphoric tone means like really over happy, over joyous tone, to convey the knight's feelings during his relationship. Okay. Now, she or he is trying to make a point here, so let's read on. The woman in this relationship is described as a fairy's child, making this relationship seem enchanting and magical. Keats writes, and nothing else saw all day long, referring to how the knight during his relationship was so blinded by this sensual and overwhelming love that he couldn't seem to escape it. The fairy gave the knight honey, wild, and man dew. The fruit that he was fed from heaven portrays how this relationship was divine and spellbinding. However, stanzas 5, 6, and 7 are the only ones laced with this true euphoric tone. Okay, so what the student is saying here is only these middle quatrains show some sort of love or real relationship or some happiness. But in terms of structure, they are surrounded by grim, dim, and ominous stanzas. Alright, so there's this small part of the poem which has some happiness. And what does this do? What effect does this have? This conveys how in Keats' mind relationships are often ephemeral, forged from I think this is us, forged from us in the moment rather than being permanent. So that happiness that was there in that relationship was not permanent, it was ephemeral, as the student says. Very good use of vocabulary. And it was just surrounded by grim stanzas, which reflects how it was just something in the moment and it then went away. So this is very good analysis of the form of the poem and the structure of the poem. Now, where's the comparison? Here it is. So that's why this is a perfect answer. The student doesn't just mention this and go away. No, they compare it to poem at 39. On the other hand, poem at 39 conveys how relationships are things that outlive even death. Alice Walker's repeat of the refrain, "How I miss my father," with an exclamation mark the second time, shows how even long after his death, she felt the pain of his loss. The modal verb, "he would have grown to admire the woman I've become," shows that she still values her father's opinion long after his passing. He still shapes her. Perhaps this is similar to La Belle Dame in some way. So now, after all the differences, after all the comparisons and the contrasting, the student does the most cleverest thing, which is to include some sort of similarity at the end. Perhaps this is similar to La Belle Dame, not in the sense that the relationship is long-lasting, but because both poems show how relationships affect people for a long time. Both poems convey the effects of relationships. However, the effects are strongly different in each poem. Okay, so this is a really good answer. It's a perfect answer, by the way, to learn from if you want to compare these two poems or you're learning these two poems. And the ending similarity that is mentioned shows that it's a complete answer, not just focusing on differences and how each poem shows a different side of relationships, but also focusing on how in some way it is similar, how that both poems show that whatever type of relationship it is, it leaves a long impact leaves an impact on the person for a very long time, whether that be negative or grim like in La Belle Dame Sans Mercy, or positive and happy and long lasting like in Poem at 39. Okay, and this is a nice conclusion. Both poems convey the effects of relationships, however the effects are strongly different in each poem. Now this is a 30 out of 30 answer, level 5 as we saw, and this is the examiner's comments. Okay, so as I said, the examiner is impressed. This is an impressive response to the poems La Belle Dame Sans Mercy and Poem at 39, fully deserving a mark at the top of the highest level, as it satisfies the criteria for this level extremely well in all cases. The clear planning, which is apparent at the outset, helps to ensure that the approach to language, structure and form is highly methodical, and that there is comprehensive coverage of the ideas in the two poems, which are evaluated in a personal and insightful way. Impressive points are made throughout with an excellent command of vocabulary that enables the candidate to contrast the mood and tone of the relationships in the two poems very effectively. The handling of each of the poems is confident and well observed, which provides a secure basis for the skillful and poised comparisons between them. A strong feature is the close language analysis at word level, how the student described about the lily, about loitering, about the use of the modal verb, which was over here. He would have grown to admire the woman I've become. So this is close language analysis at word level. Overall, a very mature approach is demonstrated with ample evidence of perceptive and discriminating ability to offer a strong and well-argued personal viewpoint that carries conviction. So that is why the student got 30 out of 30. And that is how you answer the compare and contrast question in paper 1 for iGCSE English Literature. This is also applicable for GCSE English Literature if there is such a question for comparing poems, which I think there is, but hopefully this is your complete ultimate guide for comparing and contrasting poems for iGCSE English Literature. Hopefully this video helped, and if it did, please do share it with other students who might benefit. Give the video a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.